All right, everybody. I'm not going to spend too long on introductions. Y'all know who Sarah Kendzior is, the author of They Knew, which I believe, Sarah, is out in paperback now, correct?
Yes, it is. You can get
Hey,
it in
you
paperback.
you can get it. You can put it in your backpack, walk around. It feels better. Sarah, I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. We've been talking about this, like getting into what all is happening. The last time we talked was at the beginning of 2024. I believe the episode came out on New Year's Day, and you and I were lamenting what we thought 2024 was going to look like. And it looks even more different than I think we even imagined it possibly could. How's this year treating you anyway?
Oh, I mean, on a personal level, I don't know, that's a mixed bag. But on a political level, it's mostly worse. But there are signs of life and movement that I think neither of us really saw coming that are actually encouraging, although depressing in their own right. Mainly the protest movement against the genocide of Palestinians, that are happening all over universities and cities all across America and all across the world. And of course, they're being brutally suppressed, which is the depressing part. But the fact that there is this connectivity, this pushback, this sense of moral obligation and resistance, and that it's tangible, it's something we can all witness. I don't think you and I really anticipated that, and I think it's a positive development. I just worry it will end in Tiananmen Square style tragedy. But it's still good at least to see that some people, still have their conscience intact.
There's so much to get into on everything you just said because you're exactly right. I think for me, and it's funny, and I think you work the same way. It's like the research we do, it's like the more that you learn about how this stuff works, the more that when stuff actually happens, you're like, holy hell, I got that part of it. I didn't see this other part. And like, obviously, it's always the college students who are the ones who are sound the alarm and say, no, we're done with this. I think I was looking for like the labor unions to sort of do battle in the streets or
Hmm.
for sort of political demonstrations to come out and sort of do that, on the adult level. And I think what I missed out on this, and it was something that I've been looking at for years. Back in 2023, I was always trying to tell people, and there was so much pushback. I kept telling people, I said, I have conversations with liberals and I have conversations with never Trump liberals, and they are always flirting with authoritarianism, right?
Hmm.
Like they would say, God, Donald Trump's so disgusting. He's so awful. Like, I can't believe he's so awful. Here are the things that I believe. Obviously, in this house, we believe in science, you name it. And then immediately there would be like this sort of curious flirting with like Ron DeSantis. And, like if somebody could just put this things to right, and like obviously I believe that trans people deserve to be protected, but maybe they shouldn't, be out there and be so loud about it. Like these weird little caveats that were always being carved up. And if you look at history, it's like that sort of class is always making a deal with authoritarians, right?
Oh,
Because it's about
absolutely.
power, profit, influence, affluence, you name it. And I guess what I had forgotten is that the people who are always going to stand up and say it the loudest are the people who haven't been socialized into this, who don't necessarily already have their careers completely tied within it and their economic fates and political fates tied within it. And now I look at it, and what I see is that the entire sort of liberal coalition is absolutely cracking under the pressure of basically a situation that you can't sort of equivocate. You have to take a stand on, and as a result, like the way that this thing has presented itself makes all the sense in the world, but it's not exactly what I expected it to the form I expected it to take.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that the right wing and the far right absolutely did see this coming, which is why
Right.
they made these, preemptive efforts to do things like shut down TikTok and to ban, the teaching of accurate history in schools and to ban, protests. I mean, some of that was aimed at the kind of, adult or I guess, multi-age movements that were all throughout the Trump administration and in the summer of 2020. And obviously there are people of different generations participating in this movement as well. But the main group, the dominant group, are students, are people under 30 years old, as you noted, has historically been the case. I think they felt this fear. And I do think that, some of this has to do with, where people get their media and the fact that younger people are much, much more likely to get information straight from Gaza, straight from Palestinians, straight from people whose families have been killed, sometimes from people who then are killed themselves. This is hard to talk about, but there are people that were, mutuals of mine on Twitter. I don't know if I would quite see friends, but people you follow back and forth, have casual conversations with for a long time, who I knew in Gaza, who they've been murdered. They've been murdered by Israel with U.S. assistance. And, every day we've woken up to these horrific images, and we know that this is true. We know this is happening. We know it can be stopped if the people who are doing it would choose to do so. And I think younger people see this very clearly as well, because they're also directly interacting with, Palestinians abroad or witnessing this. And also, this is their age group. This
Yep.
is a genocide of children. Nearly half of the victims of, who've been killed in Palestine are kids. So when kids are out in college campuses, they're looking at people near their own age group and thinking, what if that was me? What if that was, my little brother? The same way when I look at these kids, I see my own children. And honestly, it baffles me how people don't, how any parent looks at this and they don't see, in the eyes of a Palestinian child crying and screaming for their murdered parents, how they don't see their own child reflected back, how they don't see all that in any child anywhere. They don't see this as a universal crime. It's really disorienting, and it's so upsetting to me. Like, it's not something I almost expect from anyone, because murdering children is a universal taboo. Wanting to protect children is something you see in every culture. And what I've seen are the exact same people who are up in arms about Trump's family separation policy 5 years ago, yet perfectly fine, by the way, when Biden has the same policy. They're fine with Palestinian children being murdered. If you ask them straight out, they'll deny this, but they support Biden. They support all of the pro-Israel policies. They support all the actions that have led to this. They even support Mike Johnson. They're out defending him and saying how great it is that the Democrats are reaching across the aisle to work with seditionists, to work with far right-wing seditionists who are, connected to multiple authoritarian states, including Russia, including Israel, including Saudi Arabia. Like, none of this is good. This is just a soft, focused, watered down version of Trumpism, a continuation of the same policies. It was bad then. It's bad now. It's very clear cut. And, I appreciate all these young folks and also the older folks who do see it, for seeing it. But I'm so disgusted by a lot of the people who were on the same side we were, 2 or 3 years ago, trying to get rid of Trump and his, mafia cohort, and trying to make structural reforms, or sometimes just bulldoze certain institutions that we don't need, like the Department of Homeland Security, in this country, really trying to change things, really trying to get to the guts of it and tear it out. They've abandoned all of that for a life of complicity.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that pisses me off the most. In the research I've been doing in the past year or so, like, the thing that has become more and more clear is how much of a difference there is between stated principles and actual principles. We can talk all day about how much children matter and we need to give children better lives, but when it really comes down to it, unconsciously, a lot of people want to make sure that children not only don't live better lives, that they might even live worse lives, right? Because, like, it's you don't want somebody else to have something that you didn't have, or there's some sort of internalized violence. And I think a lot, because when we talk about this, on one hand, the situation in Gaza is so unequivocally wrong and cruel and immoral, but it's linked through all these through lines of other things that we're putting it through. There's so much intersectionality in all this. And you look at, like, how is it we could put children through this? How is it that we can look at like college students and like how many times do we see on social media people just absolutely chanting blood, 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 wanting these kids to be literally murdered on camera? And meanwhile, look at the fact of how many people who know better have subjected these children to mass shootings, a life
Hmm.
of nothing but mass shootings. And on one hand, I want to say like you almost you can say like, listen, the Republicans obviously have their relationships with not just the NRA but a culture of death and destruction. At least they own it, you know. At least they are the ones who are like, yeah, absolutely, I want everyone to have guns except for certain people of with certain pigment in their skin, but I don't care if these children are dying. I'm not even going to talk about it. The other people who are like, well, I would love to do something about this, but it's not a politically convenient time. Things
Oh,
aren't
it
necessary.
never is a convenient
It's
time.
never a convenient time.
There's an election
And
in 3 years and 11 months.
there's
We can't afford to speak about
we
that.
Sarah, we just won the election last night. And like we really got to get this coalition together or whatever. And what you start to realize, and this is unfortunate, and one of the reasons why I have felt common cause with you and I felt close to you over the years is like we have to tell people something which is uncomfortable, which is the reason we're always told that it's not time to do this is because it's not a priority to do it. They don't actually want to do it. They're
Yeah,
not
they don't.
interested. They're not interested in using political capital or capital in general or anything. It's not on their list of priorities, but they understand that they are supposed to say it is because it's a
Hmm.
performative thing. And unfortunately, the time for performance is done and the time of action is here.
Yeah, they are open enablers at this point. And the thing is this was clear from about mid 2021. That's when I started talking about it. That's when I started defining the situation as you have one party that's an abuser, the Republican Party, and you have one party that's an enabler with the Democratic Party. And the very obvious clue that this dynamic would continue was the fact that they refused to prosecute, a seditionist Congress and a career criminal, mafioso, insurrectionist former president who had committed and confessed to a incredibly large variety of crimes over a 4-year period. And then also the DOJ was given the Mueller report, already finished on a silver platter. And that was the moment where you would learn, are they actually going to hold the powerful accountable? Are they going to take on transnational organized crime? Are they serious about the sovereignty and the public safety of this country? Or are they just placeholders? Is this a placeholder presidency meant to just, basically acclimatize liberals into authoritarian support, because that's what they've done. They've made a lot of Trump policies palatable to a liberal audience, and then reinstall Trump. I look at this election not as an election, but as a reinstallation. And it was obvious to me that that was the case from 2021. And I could not figure out why other people were having a hard time seeing it. I mean, you can look at the people who Biden appointed. You can look at the fact that it was, Jared Kushner's lawyer, his ethics lawyer, Jamie Gurley, who helped get Garland into the DOJ. She's also a close friend of Biden. Biden's appointed her to multiple other divisions of the government as well. He left in Christopher Wray. He left in Louis DeJoy. He was, building Trump's wall. I mean, that's what he was doing before he switched focus to Israel. He was in the middle of overriding 26 federal laws to build Trump's wall. Like Biden is in there to carry out the Trump agenda, only to talk about it with different words in softer rhetoric in order to make it appealing to liberals. And so we now have a situation where liberals are running around screaming at people that, ha ha ha, just wait till Trump comes back and you'll be deported. They're saying this to people who could actually be deported. I saw them saying this to a Jewish immigrant from the former Soviet Union who supports Palestine, who is anti Netanyahu and anti Biden because of Biden's support for Israel. And they were saying this to him. And I'm thinking, this guy's in an incredibly vulnerable position. He could actually be deported. As an American Jew pushing back against Israel and the Biden administration, he's taking a brave stance. So somebody admirable. And this is your enemy. Like, this is who the liberals of America think is their great enemy, and that they're going to taunt and tease online. This is just one of many people.
Yeah.
They've done this to so many vulnerable people, to all the marginalized groups that Trump and his brigade of white supremacists have targeted. And they do it to trans people, to disabled people. Like, they don't care. They don't care about the humanity of other human beings, and they seem to thrive in it. And the never Trumpers really kind of dominate the discussion of our political system, which is what I also said back in 2021, that by 2024 we're going to end up with two parties unless things change soon. We're going to have a hardcore far right lunatic MAGA wing, and then we're going to have a Republican Party that people will just call the Democratic Party, which is basically what we've got. Like, the never Trumpers are the Democratic Party. And they keep saying things to me like, Sarah, you better stop talking about Gaza, or, Trump's going to take away your reproductive rights. And I'm like, well, sorry, like, that already happened.
That ship sailed.
I live in Missouri and I don't have any reproductive rights over there. I mean, but that's the thing, is like, their reaction to me and others literally losing our bodily autonomy is not, wow, that's horrible. That's such a terrible way to live. What can we do to help? Just to see it as another little, tool to batter us with in their horse race politics, to taunt us with, to mock us with. And I think that folks in what they call red states, in GOP legislature states, they see the situation so much more clearly, because we've already lost all the things that they're threatening us with. Like, oh, you're going to take away our freedom of speech. Oh, you're going to ban our right to protest. Like, we've already learned how to live around the law. We've already figured out ways of getting by. Like, is it unpleasant? Yeah. And it sure as hell would be nice if some folks would lend a hand and, instead of slapping us across the face. But it's like, don't even try to take away what I do have left, which is the ability, to criticize my government, and the moral obligation to criticize my government when my government is abetting a genocide and carrying out crimes.
Yeah, it's a good cop, bad cop routine. And
Yeah.
what basically happens in all of it is that one side says the absolute ugliest shit imaginable, and then the other side is like, "Oh God, we could never even like abide by that." And I think one of the things that, unfortunately, and this was one of the aspects of it I wanted to talk with you about, because I've had a lot of people who have been reaching out to me lately, and, they've either read a book of mine or they've read a book of yours. And like in the past, they'd be like, wow, I didn't realize history or politics looked this way. I'm sort of realizing everything I was told I was a lie. Recently, even the people who understood that politics and history were necessarily lies and propaganda, they say, I've looked around and a lot of the people that I've found common cause with, or I've found comfort with over the past few years, have changed. And
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they didn't change. Maybe I realized something about them, which by the way is horrific. That's the literal definition of horror, is thinking something was one way and it was actually another. And there are a lot of people, and I want to have a conversation about this, and let's keep it generalized, but there are a lot of people who have made a lot of money and have built a lot of power and have built a lot of influence for themselves, standing against Donald Trump, because he is an absolutely detestable human being. It's not hard to do that. And meanwhile, there is such a yawning silence right now. The number of people who we both know have been paid in order to do the things that they've done. Some people have been paid in simple access, which is actually even more disgusting than getting
Mm-hmm.
paid for it. And then there are other people that I think have simply made a calculated choice. And I think people need to understand that in the face of authoritarianism, in the face of fascism, the choice that everybody has to make is, are you going to put on the armband? Are you going to say something? Or are you going to sit in silence and not say anything and try and live your life and get what is yours and not worry about the people who are being crushed? And right now, it is a time of choosing. And what we're seeing from a lot of people is that by not making a choice, they're making a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such a profound irony in you and I having this conversation because we were both very, very early in calling out Trump as a proto-autocrat, and we were relentlessly mocked by the exact same people who
Yep.
now are making their livelihood by calling Trump a proto-autocrat. That is all that they talk about. They don't talk about any of the conditions that led to Trump even being able to run or to get into power or to get away with his crimes. They won't address any of that. They won't address the enablers. They won't address the system. They won't address broader existential problems like climate change or COVID. It's all just Trump, 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 the minutia of trials of a legal soap opera that we know is going nowhere. And the story of why it's going nowhere is actually very important. That's why I wrote 2 books about it, Hiding in Plain Sight is the story of that. So is the new to some extent of corruption in our judiciary system, of transnational organized crime infiltrating our institutions. That is why Trump is not being held accountable. They don't want to cover that. And, they see as enemies the people who really truly do want to bring this all to a stop, meaning hold Trump accountable, hold his crime cohort accountable, hold the institutions that let them all get away with it accountable, and radically transform them and expose all of the crimes and secrets that these institutions have kept for so long, and let the American people know, what their tax money is paying for. That's what they see as the enemy. It's not really Trump. Trump's their partner. It's a kayfabe WWE
Yeah.
situation. And yeah, like a lot of people's money is riding on this, which is why, if there are, say, podcasts you listen to that have a sudden switch in tone, that's the reason for it. They buy them off in subtle ways. Like, I'm not going to name names, but I can think of, one podcast where somebody had an enormous amount of loans and then those loans were forgiven. They also will pay through things like PPP loans. There's also, some of these people are listed on, FEC receipts, and you can see that they are literally paid just tweet obnoxious shit all day.
Some
There are
people,
people.
some people are bought off by a trip to the White House. Like that's
That's
enough.
the grossest thing. That is so
It's the
sad.
grossest thing.
Like,
You
I
get
would
invited
pay
to the
to
White House,
not
that's
go to
fine.
the White House. Like, if you wanted to bring me, I paid them off so I didn't have to go. Like, I don't understand how that's alluring
Oh,
in our current context. Like, I just don't. I could see it as sort of like, I don't know, like when I go see like the world's biggest ball of twine or whatever, it has like that sort of appeal where you're like, yeah, that's fair, might as well. But this is not like, this is a place where evil is being decided. It's not a place I would want to bring my children to, and it's certainly not a place I feel honored to show up at, given what they're doing in the White
oh.
House. Like, it actually matters who's in there. I mean, would you feel psyched to see the Kremlin? Like, what's wrong with these people? I don't know. But yeah, they're bought off through access, through some sense that they're now viewed as quote unquote important, through the desire to be on cable news, which again, I mean, like, I've been on cable news a
Best of
lot.
luck.
Like, it's not that exciting. Like, you talk for 2 minutes, they ask the same questions that they asked you 4 years ago and pretend that you didn't have that conversation on live television. I don't know. It's
Well,
just
Sarah,
depressing to me.
by the way, just to pull back the curtain, because I'm sure there are people who hear us talking about this, I try and tell people, because everybody still thinks cable news is cable news. Like,
It's not.
it doesn't spike your book sales. It doesn't do
Oh no, it does
anything.
nothing.
It
And you
does
have to like clean your bedroom before you go on it, or your house or whatever. Which,
it
like, at least
literally
before we got hair and makeup, I'm like,
it,
I have to make my bed for this. Like, you ask me
it
for the billionth time if I think Trump will be prosecuted, and for the billionth time I say no because of transnational crime syndicate is masquerading as the government. Like, no, I'm not sweeping and vacuuming for that shit. Anyway, go on.
it literally no, it's the equivalent, honestly, of burying your principles in order to be the person when like the local news is doing like a remote shot and you walk behind it and wave your hand and then you say to your family, "I'm on the news." Like
Yeah,
there's
and
no
that many people see it. That's the thing. It's like, it's just not,
right.
it's not circulating, and it's in part because they're refusing to cover the stories people genuinely are interested in, which are therefore appearing over on TikTok, sometimes in forms that are not reliable at all. But, for example, Palestine, Gaza, human rights violations against Palestinians, they don't want to cover that. When they do, it goes viral because people are actually very interested in the subject, but they've been told, don't cover that, too touchy, stay away. And then, of course, people like, Mehdi Hassan and others who did cover it anyway, ended up fired. We're all watching this happen right in front of our eyes. And one of the most bizarre things about it is that they're not being fired for criticizing America. This is not the typical autocratic maneuver. They're being criticized and fired and blacklisted for criticizing a foreign state.
Right.
And it's like, I think if this were any other state, if this was Russia or China or something like that, people would see very clearly how bizarre this is, that there's some sort of prohibition against criticizing a state that is committing genocide as that state is openly bragging about their murders. But no, we're not supposed to talk about it. And I think folks have just had enough of that. The majority of Americans, they're on the same side as us. I mean, including, nearly half of registered Republicans even. So this is not some fringe, weird view. People don't want to see children murdered. It's very basic. Do cable news hosts mind seeing children murdered? I don't think they mind it that much, or at least they're told to not express that if they do, and they're willing to go along with that, and that's their choice. Like you said, that's what they're choosing. But for somebody to be lured by that, lured into silence otherwise, like, it is so weird. It is so weird to watch all these like scholars of authoritarianism who rightly warn of Trump as an autocratic threat just go completely silent when Biden is doing the same things, because it's the people who get hurt that matter, and the same people are getting hurt under each administration. And of course, if Trump gets in, he's just going to continue all of this. But they don't seem to care about the victims. It's just about this sort of, binary, this weird kind of soap opera style war on top of the war that they've, cooked up to make sure that we do not focus on the real war, the real deaths, the real casualty, the real pain. They just want us to look at this silly, legalese shit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, again, I think that reveals everything in terms of like what your actual principles are. Because I know a lot of people that I've talked to are like, well, like the semester's almost over. This thing's going to go away. This isn't going away.
No.
Nothing that's happening right now. And by the way, like maybe the police will crack, enough skulls or maybe even kill enough people that like people will be afraid to protest. Like the train that is coming down, like this is not the last thing that's going to happen on this path. Like this is the beginning of where we're going. Like not just climate change, but growing authoritarianism, the continued corruption of all of this stuff. Like we're watching. I'm sorry, but anybody who isn't paying attention to what John Fetterman is doing,
Oh
like
God,
with
yes.
like daily, you brought up Mike Johnson earlier. Like him and Mike Johnson are like a couple of weeks away from doing like a buddy cop comedy movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's incredible. Like the signaling that he's doing, the ways that the Democratic Party is starting to co-opt even the things that the Republican Party is doing as resources dwindle, as economic austerity gets worse. Like we're going to see more of this. Like these kids aren't protesting because they're crazy or because they want attention. It's because they're screaming something's wrong and it's not being handled. And what are you doing? You're beating them and brutalizing them and going ahead and killing all these people over here instead of actually addressing what's happening. And I'm sorry, you can kick this can down the road all you want, but it's only going to grow and grow. I tried to say a couple of weeks ago what we're actually watching is we're seeing the terms of how the conversation about what's coming, what those terms are. And the terms are if you say anything about it and you don't get in line, you can get killed. Or you're going to
Yeah.
lose your careers, you're going to lose any economic standing. They'll start with the economics, they'll start with your career, they'll start with loans, any of that stuff. The next thing that comes are batons and rubber bullets and outright violence. And after that, I mean, all bets are off.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to go back to your point about Fetterman, what were the kids doing that are like on college campuses now protesting to protect, Palestinians? They were helping out on campaigns like John
Yep,
Fetterman's. They were
that's right.
helping the Democrats. They were the canvassers. They were the activists. They were the people going door to door. They're the people with the energy and the free time to do stuff like that. And they were willing to do it in 2020 and in 2022 for the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party had made a lot of promises to them
That's right.
about what their future would be, that they would take issues like climate change seriously, student loan forgiveness, economic opportunity, civil rights, all of these things. Instead, they've gone and done the opposite. And I think that sense of betrayal is one of the most powerful emotions you can feel. And I think people's reaction to Fetterman, who's cheering as cops at Penn and other universities in Pennsylvania are beating young people in the streets. They are profoundly full of regret that they ever participated in the process of getting him elected. I see people express guilt, and it's not their fault. They were duped. They were absolutely duped by, the DNC and by Fetterman himself and by so many others. But then you see the people who act as if that never happened, as if this was just, always out there, and they should have expected this. It's like, no, they're right to feel betrayed. But the thing is like, you never forget who betrayed you. When someone starts out overtly awful, like for the way Donald Trump is, where of course you expect him to do awful things. The emotion of that is very different than when somebody gives you hope and somebody makes you promises, and you have, you and I are, I think, too beaten down by life. But, for others, they have a flickering inside them of like, okay, maybe this will finally end, maybe things will finally get better. But that to be snuffed out by the very person who you gave up your time and energy and money for, it's just such a horrific form of abuse, and they will never forget how that made them feel, and that's going to give them the energy, to continue these protests and to continue, what's basically a youth uprising. And that, I agree with you that it's not going to stop. Like, if the Democrats wanted to stop it, they would radically change their policies. Like, that's the thing, is people wanted the campaign promises that Biden and others ran on to be enacted. They're not, on the whole, asking for very radical things. They're asking for our country stop massacring children. That's not radical. That's the most basic elemental expression of morality you can have. That our government treats it as radical shows where their morality stands and how deeply it's sunk, and how there really, in this regard, is no difference between them and the Trump camp. They want the exact same thing when it comes to this particular policy, and when it comes to their value of human life in general. Like before Gaza, there was how the Biden administration handled COVID. Denying the existence of long COVID, hiding data, lying about the vaccine, saying the pandemic is over. People learned the hard way that administration just simply does not value human life. And they see people as disposable. And now we see them, seeing people abroad as so disposable they can be murdered along with their families and their children. And they're not going to just forget that. I just don't think it's possible.
I think that what we're seeing right now, people think that this is just some sort of a rash breakout of things, disrespectful kids who have been radicalized by TikTok. But what they've been radicalized is by a system that hasn't listened to them and hasn't cared for them. And they have every right to feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I guess, I don't know. The things I was thinking about were so bleak, is that, like, one thing that does make us distinct from previous generations is that this generation has a ticking time bomb above their heads,
Yes.
with climate change. I guess other generations felt that way with nuclear war, but, which is also unfortunately on the table. But I think that is something, there's a sense of urgency that, this geriatric administration is not responding to in ways that, I think that's perhaps part of why we see the age discrepancy, where the
Yeah.
leadership is so much older than the people protesting. Is like, they know, I don't mean to be so blunt about it, but they know they're not going to be here in 10 and 20 years to
Yeah.
deal with it. Like, Trump and Biden will not live to see the consequences of their actions. Everybody who's, under 30 now, or many of them, will. And we're all at the same time as trying to, change our political system, work within it, work around it. Like, people also are cultivating a survivalist instinct. They're
Yeah.
thinking literally, like, how do we survive, rising temperatures that eliminate crops, that deny us free water? And I don't know. I think the reason my mind kind of wandered as I was, thinking about all the apocalypse fiends, like the really, really dark undercurrent of this, which is basically, mafia operations, mercenary genocidaires, like people who, truly, like they want fewer people alive because then there are more resources for them, and that's all it boils down to. And that's kind of the undercurrent of everything. And in a way, I hope a lot of these protesters aren't thinking about that. I hope they're able to stick to their concrete demands and their moral integrity. Because when you go down that road, when you read what a lot of these billionaires are after, it's a very dark, dark road. But I am somewhat hopeful, at least hopeful about the moral integrity of this nation, and that people feel that they see the situation clearly and they feel obliged to speak up against it, even if it jeopardizes their career, their money, and so forth. I just hope it doesn't culminate, as you said, in how it often does, especially in autocratic states, with batons and bullets and prison sentences, and the kind of horrific massacres we see, in Gaza. We've seen Russia do in Ukraine. We've seen all around the world. I hope we don't get to that place. I think it's a place that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle want to bring us to, and the bulk of Americans, thankfully, do not. But we'll see. There's a lot
Yeah.
of things we've wanted that they haven't given us, so
Well, and
we'll have to take them.
just before we finish this up, I agree. And the problem here, and I've talked to a few of the protesters, and they've asked me sort of where I think it's going, and I tell them that this is like these great clashes of not just generations, but also in authoritarian movements, like the push for small d democratic populist movements is always met with reactionary forces. It's always met with crackdowns. It's always met with violence. You always see the authoritarian right that rises up, and by the way, the middle, the center gets radicalized along with it. And I say this isn't comfortable, but the chances are that as this grows, the reaction's going to grow and the danger is going to grow. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this isn't some sort of it's not a television show, it's not a movie, there's not a speech that's given and suddenly everything's okay. Like there is a lot of tribulation and trial, I think, ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, folks have learned that the hard way. But the problem was, I think they linked it specifically to Trump, even though it had happened before. I covered Ferguson. I watched those police beatings. I ran from tear gas, and anybody who covered Occupy or other protests during the Obama era, they witnessed a lot of the same behavior. I think there is this illusion that this would stop if we just got rid of Trump. And then when Biden came in, and then the same behavior not only was carried out, but we saw the rise of cop cities, enormous amounts of money given to the police, all of the conditions created to make the crackdown we have now it's dawning on people that this doesn't really have to do with who is the president. It has to do with structures that are a lot more powerful and entrenched and well funded than that. And that you can't vote out the mafia. You can't exactly vote out police brutality. I mean, it's still important to vote. And I think, honestly, the further down the chain you go on that ballot, the more local you get, I think more important your vote is going to be, because those people are going to be the bulwark against, a federal autocracy, which is, I do think, what we're going to have, kind of regardless of who wins. Obviously with Trump, it's more overt. So it's important. But I think, yeah, a lot of folks, and again, I don't blame them. I don't blame like young people for being deceived by a bunch of people who are
No.
professional deceivers. They lied, they campaigned on things they were never going to do. We were all terrified because of COVID. We all thought, well, this is rock bottom. There's no way to go up. That's unfortunately not true. There's a whole chasm right next to us that we didn't even notice, and we've all fallen inside. But at least now, we see each other there. There's some safety in the darkness. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sarah, as always, for the chat. I needed this. I think a lot of people did. And yeah, please be safe.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.